I'm delighted that this question about definitions has come up, because I'd really like to put you under the test. Can you tell me the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee?
I admit and admitted before this.
No, you're using words. You're using
to answer the question.
No, because you've answered it because you don't know the answer.
You don't want me to answer the question.
I'd like you to even to understand what the definition of an economic migrant is. Because
it's a very obvious definition.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
Okay, you speak and then I'll let you come in.
I don't think, and this is the problem that you've got. You say, we don't want, we're happy with this. We're happy with refugees and asylum seekers. You don't actually know what the difference is. You don't actually know what the meaning is. We've got a real problem. We've got a real problem with economic.
Tell us what the difference is.
We've got a real problem with economic migrants. But you don't actually know what an economic migrant is. You are part of the bigoted fraternity of nonsense and a failure to understand of definitions. And only when that you're prepared to understand it and speak for some degree of authority is anyone really going to listen to you. Can I go to the question about the judicial aspect? Because I think it's an important aspect.
Tell us.
The reason why, I'll be delighted. My fees are £115 an hour. In terms of the judicial authority, it's a very important point. Why aren't they being believed in court? And I'll tell you why. Because the government has raped legal aid to such a point that when an asylum seeker is seeking help to actually put their case in court, they are not being given the proper justice and access to justice to put their case before a judge. And if you try and evidence an asylum case together, where somebody has fled a country because they're going to be tortured, funnily enough, they don't carry a bag of bloody evidence with them. They flee with their bloody life. And when they get there, they don't have the evidence with them. So when you're then in front of a judge and saying, actually, we've got to present this case and this person was about to have a machete put in their head just because they supported the MDC in Zimbabwe rather than ZANU-PF, then unless I've got a piece of evidence to support it, the judge doesn't agree. But unless I'm not equipped to go into court and he's not funded to have representation in court, he doesn't stand a chance, and that's the reason.
Well, I think I was going to actually ask, because I think Jason's got to come back in, but I actually think it is a good question to clarify the differences, that you've asked.
Well,
so maybe because you've also asked it actually.
What relevance does it have to UKIP? What relevance does it have?
Well, maybe
go on pontificating.
Mark, would you like to just clarify
at least
the differences?
Do it from a bit of an intelligent point of
But
view.
would you like to clarify the differences? Would you like to clarify the differences? Because I think it would, it's come out. So what's the difference between a refugee, an asylum seeker, and an economic migrant?
An asylum seeker is somebody who has come to the UK, who has claimed asylum, but has not been found as yet to be a refugee. A refugee is somebody who has, for a convention reason, is allowed in the country and is escaping from persecution in some form, religion that might be associated with their religious views, their political views, or because of who they are. An economic migrant, well, I think I'm probably an economic migrant because I've worked abroad in the past. I went to go and do a job somewhere else and I came back again. People do go, but they're not. Economic migrant sounds like it's something negative.
I maintain this country's got a first-class reputation.
Okay, can you come through the chair? Because I want to give Jason a chance now to respond.
I certainly has no. And that's the point. I entirely agree with George. We're now in a 21st century. In the 21st century, business is no longer in Bradford. Is no longer in London. I pick up my laptop in the morning. I'm speaking to China at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly.
I'm speaking to the States in the afternoon in Bradford. The world is small. Now, people should be allowed to move. And the day that we talk to them every day on Skype, on email, the world in the 21st century is a big place. And people should be entitled to move around.
Okay, Jason.
Right, I think we need to just get with some facts now on this subject. The immigration policy in this country currently is a two-tier policy. Anyone from outside the EU, there can be restrictions on, and there's a cap on those people. Anyone from inside the EU, there's an absolute open door policy. Our policy, and I've stated this on a number of occasions, and you look at it if you want yourselves, we are the party, the only party who doesn't discriminate against anybody. We want a fair immigration policy for everyone in the world. Just as the people from the EU are allowed to come to this country and work, we think it should be right for anyone from anywhere in the world to come and work. We want a point system so everybody has a fair shot of coming in. This lady mentioned, what about a friend from the EU? Fair question. What about
my grandson? Actually,
well, it could be anyone from the EU. But what about somebody who has family from the rest of the world? Surely you're not suggesting that you should have a discriminative immigration policy. We want a fair policy. Because we do want limits on immigration, because that's only the sensible thing to do. But to suggest that you're going to persecute people from outside Europe and say, we won't let any of you in, just so we can let hundreds of thousands of EU people in, I think that's discrimination. And I think that the Labour, Lib Dem and Tory policies is a policy of a discriminative, it's a discriminatory policy on immigration. And this sort of questioning really annoys me, because we're criticised for our immigration policy when we're the only policy it's the only policy that's fair, and that's a fact.
Well, it's only fair in that it wants to discriminate against everybody
Doesn't
equally.
George? No. We want like 50,000 people in a year, and we won't suggest where these people come from, George. That's the difference.
Okay, I've got some audience people and I've got some panel people who want to speak. I know you've had your hand up for a lot, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to speak, but I really must ask the two people and then I'll come back to the audience, okay?
Cheers, thank you. On the what UKIP are excellent at doing, and hats off to you, you've done it really, really well, is trying to present a veneer of credibility and a veneer of equality. But one only has to go so far as to reading your manifesto to come across the hatred. Now, in terms of economic migrants, it's been pointed out very, very well that you guys view it as though it's this huge drain on resources. And on the EU website, the UKIP website, they make a point of saying that we will prevent anybody from the EU being able to gain benefits for the first 5 years.
Correct.
This makes the assertion that people are coming here to claim benefits. I promise you, sir, my father did not come halfway across the world to claim £60 a week. Thank you.
Okay, two people from the panel now, and then I'll open it up, and then I think there'll be time probably for one last question, so, yeah.
Okay, just two quick points. And picking up on the issue of the culture of disbelief in terms of tradition and what you were saying, Mark, I mean, I think even with that, in terms of all the kind of obstacles in terms of getting legal aid, even when you get that, the staggering number of original decisions that are then overturned. What is it, 24% on average? Some countries up to 48%. What other government department would actually have appeals being overturned at that kind of rate? So I think we fundamentally need to challenge that disbelief, cultural disbelief, in terms of the very start of the process, to make sure that there isn't this kind of significant number of decisions overturned. The other thing I wanted to say was your point, George, about the kind of benignness of the Commonwealth. I actually don't think it's benign at the moment. The fact is that the Commonwealth countries are going to meet in November at their summit in Colombia and Sri Lanka, which is a country that still tortures its own citizens, and that's the British government actually accepting that at the moment. And I think that's absolute disgrace.
I have three answers. The first part is what Mark already has said about the difference between the concept asylum seekers, refugees, and the economic migrant. It's a UN language mainly, because in that language, and as somebody is called asylum, there is a term called IDP, internally displaced person. Internally displaced person is like most of our relatives who didn't have the chance to leave the Congo. As long as you are fleeing within the territory, the national territory, you are called IDP, internally displaced person. But as soon as you cross the border, you go to the neighboring country or you go far away, your name change, you become an asylum seeker, somebody seeking for asylum. And as soon as you get your asylum, your name change, you become a refugee. And many people, even in this city, don't know that difference. So it's true. I came across many people saying, in my street, there are plenty of asylum seekers who are driving beautiful car, who has taken our ladies. And finally, what I noticed is that they don't understand the concept. Somebody, and many of them say sometimes, for example, that these people who came without English yesterday, today, a couple of years later, they are driving a Porsche car. That, I think it's a question of when somebody become a refugee, even if you knew that he was asylum seeker, as soon as he get the status to remain, they have right to work. And when somebody work, why can they not have car? So in the mind of people in street, they'll be thinking that these people are still, 10 years later, thinking that they are still asylum seekers. So that is the key point. The second thing I want to say is about Reverend Rita's question, the disbelief. I think personally that apart from the reason given by Mark and Jim, I think another reason is the fact that we are living in a country which is, not only this country, we are living in the West, which is media-led. Anything which is not in the media is wrong, or it doesn't exist. For example, when we fled the Congo 11 years ago, many of our fellow refugees were deported. Why? Because they were, for example, telling the story how before reaching the area where they could get plane, they walked 100 miles, or let's say 500 kilometers. For people in the Home Office, they could not understand how can you walk. That is absolutely wrong, you are lying. You see? So anything which is not in the media, anything which is not in the TNA, anything which is not in sound, nobody will trust you. So that is, and I do think that another reason is René Descartes. He's a French philosopher. His philosophy was, I think you are strong in philosophy. His philosophy was rationalism. And he's the one in 60s or 17th century was saying, don't believe in what does have evidence. And this is from where people, even in the UK, started doubting about God, because they said, oh, if I can't see God, then God doesn't exist. So René Descartes, for me, is the one who has abused the system in this country. So because the evidence, when, as Mark said properly, when you are fleeing to save life, do you need to go and take the photographer so that you can show that you have evidence? So that's the last thing is about divide and rule. Divide and rule. Thank you, George Galloway, for saying that properly.
Well, you're talking about yourself, sir, because I see you in a different suit every day, selling Jesus to the English.
Okay, I was saying this. George Galloway said very well how divide and rule, that principle is still ongoing. Because yesterday the problem is that not only the UK, all colonial masters use the divide and rule so that they can rule over the resources and on the people. So here, today, the system has changed. Now they use others to do the job. So that principle of divide and rule is still going on. So as long as the politicians in the West will do that, in the other side of the world, there will be always problem.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, one here, yeah. And there's the lady at the top, yeah. And then there'll be two here, and then I'll ask Malik. Wait, Malik, you're Malik.
Malik.
No, Malik to say the last question. Yeah.
My question is, you keep harping on about the economic migrants. It sounds like to me you're all pissed off about the economic migrants and you're focusing all your anger on them. Once you've actually finished with that group, which group are you going to go for next?
Yeah, good point.
No, and also what I want
You
to...
do very quickly. Yeah.
Wait, hold on. Also, you keep harping about sovereignty. What are you on about? Explain that to me.
Okay, very quick response, because we've got time for...
Really quick response. When we finish dealing with economic migrants and getting a balanced immigration policy, that's all we're interested in. We're not interested in anything else. On the issue of sovereignty, what we are concerned about is, human rights and civil liberties. If you want to be ruled by an undemocratic government in Europe, that's up to you. But I don't think the British people want that.
Yeah, but excuse me, what is British? When there's so many people from different countries moved into this country,
Everyone who's in Britain is British.
Well, if I go...
Okay, can I have 2 more questions? You and then you. Another question here, another question or comment.
About not confusing asylum seekers, immigrants, refugees. And I think sometimes the media and particular parties, including UKIP, are guilty of doing that. Just think about the language we use. I mean, Jason's done it tonight about opening the doors, and it just creates the impression in people's mind about the Sandgap refugee camp, about people queuing up, flooding to get in. And another point which George made, which I agree with, is there's nothing wrong with being an economic migrant. People want better lives for themselves, for their families. No one comes here, like the guy said, behind for £60 a week. So I think we just need to get that right in people's head and stop confusing the issues on purpose, just so we can get above those elections.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Quick one, because we need to move on.
I'd just like to reassure the lady here who's got a grandson who's Czech that there won't be any problems of him arriving in the UK and visiting. My grandson, who is Turkish, is coming over next weekend with his father, and I don't anticipate any problems for him coming into the UK. I'd just like to cover a point which was raised with regards to Vision on UKIP, which I'm actually the chair of the Yorkshire Wales branch. We aren't a right-wing party, we're a centrist party. How do I know? Because quite recently we've had several councillors join us from the Labour Party in the north of England, and they wouldn't be joining us if they didn't believe that we're a centrist party. The other thing I'd like to say, if you look at the candidate list we put up, you'll see we've got a lot of people with various ethnic backgrounds, that we're certainly not a party that's exclusive to white British people. For example, in Croydon North we had Winston Mackenzie, who's a West Indian.
You sacked him.
You
sacked him.
Yeah,
you sacked him 4 days before polling day.
He's good in the party. In Halifax, we had a Sikh who's still in the 2010 general election. Now, I could go on, I haven't got the whole list of candidates yet, but I just want to assure people that we are not a right-wing party and we can't be pigeonholed as such. And the chairman I report to in Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire tells me that he believes that we are a centrist party, neither the right or the left wing of politics in Britain.
Okay.
So, there we go.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to ask Malik to do the last question, then there'll be a last round. I apologise those who didn't get to ask the question, but, you know, there was a great debate, and I think it was better to let that flow. Malik.
I'm Malik. My name is, my question is, what are the things that can be done to make Bradford a more welcoming city for refugees?
Okay, thank you very much. So maybe I'll just ask Benoit to lead off, because, you know, you've experienced it. Is it welcoming or not?
Bradford is the best place where I could be. Although I gave an example, for me that is isolated cases where, because you know, on BCB radio, I have a radio program called Peace Music. It's a program where in CRC, Conflict Resolution Center, we are using music as a tool to pass our peace messages to Bradford. And funny things, the message is going around the world, because we are receiving feedback from Italy, from Japan and America, where I have never been. So Bradford for me is the best place where a refugee could come.
Could it be better?
Could be better.
Could it be better?
To be better, I think, as I said previously, we have things to do. As refugees, we have to make sure that we are contributing, we are integrating. That is the first thing. In the other side, the community which has received us has also to do their part to love us. That is, when we do that in both sides, Bradford will be the best place where to do it.
Okay, thank you. Jim.
I'd echo Ben's comments. I think what I would just add to, though, in terms of warning, is the fact that we need to make sure that the whole divide and rule principle doesn't come in. I think what you're going to see over the next 2 years in terms of the run-up to the European election and general election is the attempt to go back to this, you know, well, asylum seekers are deserving, refugees even more deserving, EU migrants less deserving, and we need to make sure that there is no divisions actually drawn up between those different groups. That I think it is refugees and asylum seekers need to recognise the legitimate rights of EU migrants in this country, and likewise EU migrants need to kind of recognise the legitimate and humanitarian rights of refugees and asylum seekers, and it's absolutely crucial that we don't allow divisions to grow between those groups.
Okay, thank you. Jason.
I'd just like to come back on the gentleman's point there about benefits. It's been brought up a couple of times in the audience. Why the question was, why are we concerned about benefits? Well, let me ask you the question. If someone comes to the country, who's paying into this pot to give people housing and benefits? You know, if people in the UK believe that we should be funding effectively the European Health Service, then that's a business for them. I think the people who put into the pot should be people who get out of the pot. Well, you might laugh about that, sir, but in the last local elections, UKIP pulled 25% of the pot, so 1 in 4 people agree with what I'm saying. So that's the fact on benefits. Next, there's the fact, George. Well, the figures are there, George.
Most of the country didn't vote.
They didn't vote for respect.
They didn't vote at all. It was only rural county elections, for God's sake.
You can't.
The cities didn't
that
get
is
a
the word
vote.
of the people, George. You can't dispute
The real verdict.
Okay, can I just ask on the question about Bradford? Can I just ask you what could be made better for refugees here in Bradford?
Well, I think the number one thing to do on refugees, I think it's been covered with the panel already, is language. That is the biggest thing to integration in any society, is language. If we can ensure that people have good opportunity to learn the language to a good degree, that is I think the one best thing that we could do. Can I just make one really other quick point on the general subject of UKIP being a party of hatred? Well, anyone check out the information, you'll find it's not true. And here's one reason. We're the only party who will not accept. We will not accept anybody into our party, even as a member who's been a member of any extremist group. The Labour Party won't say that, the Tory Party won't say that, and Lib Dem won't say that. And the reason why the Labour Party won't say this is because Labour have former BNP councillors standing for them in the last elections, and I think that's a scandal. So rather than having a go at UKIP, people need to inform themselves. We have got some very dodgy people out there, but they're not standing for UKIP.
Okay, if we only have 5 minutes left, and I want to give Mark and George a chance to say a final word, but I've got 2 people in front who've been really desperate to say something. You're right, if I let them speak, we'll be probably just a few minutes over 8. Is that okay? Yeah.
I think, what can we do in Bradford for refugees to make it better? I'm coming on 2 stands here. As a former Labour councillor in Bradford, I would say educate the politicians initially, because the majority of councillors in Bradford wouldn't know a refugee if they met one. A lot of the councillors are uneducated in terms of refugee issues. And it's taken Bradford nigh on 6 years to get a new arrivals strategy, which I still don't think we've got, despite massive debate trying to get this through. It's just not. We need to educate statutory services in terms of refugee and asylum issues, and that includes education, health, social services, the whole gamut. And as somebody who's worked as a side as a Labour councillor with refugees for 12 years, I think the refugees themselves are the best people to educate.
There seems to be a consensus that learning English is a priority and would be in Bradford as elsewhere for refugees. Can I ask, would UKIP restore free ESOL tuition for asylum seekers, which is currently in the previous government scrapped, so people actually do not have the opportunity to learn English until sometimes after several years their asylum claims eventually succeed, at which point they're at a very serious disadvantage because there is no state provision of English tuition. So
Do you wanna-
would you restore
Do
that?
you want to respond to that
Yeah,
quickly?
yeah. Really. As I mentioned tonight, and a lot of the audience don't seem to be getting it, but we are really genuinely, concerned about refugees and asylum seekers, and the money that we'll save because we'll have an immigration cap, or an undiscriminatory immigration policy. We can do things like this gentleman suggested, and we certainly support that.
Okay, so I'm going to give now Mark and then George the final words from the panel. Mark.
I haven't had any illustrious political career. My only highlight, I suppose, was that I was the election agent when Nick Griffin stood in Keighley. Not for Nick Griffin. And I was the moment when he lost and was trounced, and in fact the sitting MP increased her majority because of Nick Griffin, was the proudest moment I had politically. When Nick Griffin first came, I shuddered with fear. But actually, when you talk to the people of Bradford and Keighley, you actually found the most decent, tolerant people, inherently decent and tolerant. And therefore, when I hear the rancid bonkers that's peddled by people here, and I'm afraid some of the nonsense you've come out with.
He's still not put his money on the table.
He's still not put his money on the table.
You say that, but a lot of people agree with us, so that's...
I know that the Bradford district will always continue to be welcoming to refugees and to migrants here. But the message of this is, as it was in 2005, when Griffin was here, is if you want to stop these people thinking that they're actually an electoral asset, you do have to go and vote. You do have to go and express your view. And you do actually have to stop them. And I have to say there's another incentive now, because if you don't, I might lose my 20 quid.
Okay, George.
Well, I sought political asylum in Bradford last year, and I was overwhelmingly welcomed in a landslide victory over you amongst. No, you were just speaking.
No, I was.
You were the stand-in.
I was only standing.
You were the stand-in. So I think that Bradford's record speaks for itself, as Mark has just said. There's a rejection here of these extremists, and I must say the idea that UKIP are not a party of the right was treated by the audience with the amusement that it deserves. I know why liberal-minded, decent people, Christian people and so on, campaigning on these issues, insist on the dichotomy between refugees, asylum seekers and immigration. But I caution against it, because there is nothing wrong with economic migration. If economic migration was a bad thing, America would be the poorest country in the world and Bangladesh would be the richest, because nobody emigrates to Bangladesh. And many people have and would like to emigrate to the United States. Putting a cap on migrants doesn't save money, it costs money. Nonsense. Migrants are the hardest working people in the land. That's a simple matter of historical fact. The people who go all the way from one country to another do not go for £60 a week benefit. There are 200,000 French people, for example, living in London. How many of them do you think came from Paris to endure the bus service in London for £60 a week in benefits? They're in London, they're working, they're paying taxes, they're generating wealth. If we had given the people of Hong Kong, before the handover, British passports, and if 1 million of them had come here, how many of them do you think would be claiming £60 a week on benefit? Or would we have had 1 million Chinese people generating wealth in our country, paying tax, employing people, buying things? It's obvious, it's not rocket science. You only have to look at the economic history of the world to see that migration is a multiplier. It drives economic activity. Not least because the migrant wants to send some money back to his family, might want to bring his family over, might want to make a nest egg and then go back, as many Polish workers have done. Have you ever met anyone that employed a Polish a plumber or electrician or labourer and wasn't happy with the results. The Polish workers, the best workers that we had in this country, and it's our misfortune that they've gone back to Poland. Because they're economic migrants, when our economy went down and Poland's economy went up, they went back to Poland. It's in the name, it's on the tin, economic migrant. So I caution any false dichotomy between these two things, because these people make no dichotomy. As you found out when Mark questioned them, they don't even know the difference between refugees, asylum seekers, and economic migrants. What it really means is people who speak in foreign tongues and who have faces that look like yours and yours rather than mine. They don't make a distinction, neither should we. We should defend the rights, of course, of people who are genuinely subject to fear of persecution in their own countries. That's a given. We've all agreed on that. Even UKIP signed up to that tonight, although it'll be in English rather than in French. Nonetheless, binding. But we should defend the principle of immigration. Without immigration, the world's economy would simply cease to turn. And here's a bit of news for you. There's 200,000 French people living in London. There's 255,000 British people living in Paris.
I know you've got things to say, but you can all go down now to Foster's restaurant in Centenary Square, where food and drinks will be available to purchase, sorry. Can I thank you all very much? You've been a great audience, rowdy but
He's
courteous.
not going to cover that money, so
It's on film.
covering it?
It's on film, George.
Right.
The only thing is I'm not allowed to use yourself, but we've had a handshake.
Oh, there's some vouchers for £5 off.
You can't get away.
Want to go to Foster's. And can I finally, can I thank the organisers. Ben's going to thank people in a minute. I want to first of all thank the panel, who I think have done an excellent job in keeping to 3 minutes each and lively discussion. We need more of these debates, in my view. Thank you very much.
What I want to say to conclude this amazing week, Refugee Week, is this. On the behalf, because Refugee Week is a time for recognition, time for gratitude. Recognition from the host community that migrants are contributing to the economy of this country, but also gratitude from refugees like myself to say thank you, Bradford, thank you, Bradfordians, thank you, Yorkshire, thank you, thank you, the UK, for receiving us as such with our weaknesses and with our strengths as well. Thank you.